Hey, my creative friends. My name is Shannon from shannonstudio.com, and I am here to talk about a creative life, what a creative life might look like for us, creativity tips, like little things, like little nuggets that might help in living a creative life, and all the things, my creative life in Sweden, what that might look like sometimes. So yeah, all the creative things. And on Sunday, hey, Shanna. Shanna has a name almost close to mine. Shanna Christensen and Shannon Christensen. And today's Sunday. So on Sunday, I try to tie in some creativity with spirituality. So I try to tie in things that way. So we talk about those kinds of things. But yesterday I got my subscription from Marian PCN. She's on Instagram. She lives in Sweden, and so I get a subscription letter filled with just little goodies. I opened that yesterday, so we saw that. So I just was going to show you today the envelope I made from some of that stuff that I sent to my niece. So that's the envelope, and then I'll write in her address and stuff, and then I add things to it. So just something about, because I think it's just fun to get stuff in the mail that looks like this. It just is fun. And plus I write her a little note and add some little things in it. So just had to show you that super easy to do something like that, to just brighten somebody else's day when you get your day brightened. Hey, Trisha. So today was a lazy Sunday. We had our church at home, and yeah, it was just, it's amazing to me how Sundays are now, because before, Sundays were not a day of rest, to be honest. Because when you, in my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we go and we serve, and we, I've served with the kids, I've served with the teenagers, I've served with adults, and it's like, go, 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 go. And then, before, it's like, have all the kids, feed the kids. It's like this huge life. And now with just 3 of us and not going to church, it's just slowed way down. And I think this is the first time in my life that the Sabbath has actually been a day of rest for any extended period of time. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't serve or do those kinds of things. I'm just saying it's different. It's just different right now. And I try to just go with it. Before, when we were busy, I would always take another day to really kind of rest and, tune into different things. And reading my scriptures during the week always gave me an extra boost. So when those busy Sundays came, that it wasn't, I wasn't like I didn't feel empty. So it's just different, and I like it. I like the difference. So we have that. Okay, so today, I was listening to a song a little while back that I really like this song, Who Wants to Live Forever. It is this song that Queen sang in 1986, and then the Canadian tenors and Lindsey Sterling fairly recently did. They both had videos of it. So I looked at the Eddie Mercury one where he's singing, and when he's singing, he's got this, there's a lot of people around, and it's a big anthem song. Like the gestures are huge, and he walks down these stairs, and there's candles everywhere, and it's just this big giant production. As far as, they're both big productions, but I mean, as far as, it was just this grand entrance and this presentation that was totally different from the idea that the Canadian tenors did. Theirs was in a castle, and it was dark and moody, and it was mostly this internal struggle of who wants to live forever. And as I was looking at those 2 songs and their interpretations, it was so interesting. You can see this with all kinds of things, with art and music and stories, and just the interpretation people get, the implied meaning that comes to them through some piece of, like this, in this case, a song. So they get a meaning from it. Whether it's the meaning that somebody intended isn't always the case. And sometimes when you use the same words, they can have different outcomes. And I've even had that in my artwork, where I did this painting. I mean, I did this colored pencil drawing, and it was quite large, and I did it with the scripture, you know, break off the chains that bind you, meaning, you know, turn to Christ, break off the chains that bind you. So there were these hands with chains wrapped around them, and there was a light coming down, and then there were two hands coming down from above, open hands, like reaching for the hands that were down below in chains. So it was supposed to be a representation of Christ and our breaking free from the chains of sin. So, you know, that was my intention. And then my friend saw it, and she loved it. It reminded her of her slavery ancestors. It reminded her of the chains that they were bound with. And she happens to be black. And so it moved her in a way that I had not thought about or intended, but was just as valid. And and I remember I gave her the drawing because I had framed it. I really loved it. It was on this dark paper, colored pencil. But one day, it was sitting in my bedroom, just leaning against this, you know, cupboard thing. And I saw, I think it was Logan at the time, walking up it. Like he had his feet on it. He was holding on to something, had his feet on it, walking up it. And I thought, you know what? This is... And I knew how much it moved her, so I gave it to her, and I just basically said, this means more to you than it did to me. Not that I didn't love it, but it brought out a more of a meaning to her. The implications, you know, naturally drawn, just meant a lot to her, so I gave it to her. And so I've had that too, where people have, hey Raylyn, where people have seen my artwork and then had more meaning to it than I intended, or that I just didn't see, you know, because when she brought up that meaning, I thought, I can go with that. That totally makes sense. And so it made me think of how we read the scriptures. I remember being in Provo, and I believe it was an Elder Bateman from our church came to talk to our congregation, our larger congregation called a stake. And it was, he talked about search, ponder, and pray the scriptures. And the search and the pray are obviously obvious, but the ponder part, which I think what he said was to ponder over the scriptures for 3 minutes. You know, every time you read the scriptures. And what struck me was, if it was 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or something small, whatever it was, it struck me as such a small amount of time. Such a small amount of time to ponder, to think, to just sit there and think about what you read. And so I started doing that because I figured 3 minutes, that's hardly anything. And if he thinks 3 minutes can do something, and he only suggested 3 minutes, not like 30 minutes, not like 13 minutes even, but 3 minutes there, we must be able to get something out of that. And so I started doing that. And one of the things that I started to think about was the implied meaning when reading the scriptures. So, for instance, the scripture, the Lord will make you free. Well, the implied meaning is that there's somebody who wants to captivate you. There's somebody who wants to hold you captive. If he's going to make you free, it also means somebody is keeping you captive. So, you know, just that. And then who is that? What does that mean? What does that look like? So then it starts to lead to questions a lot of times. So it leads to this, you know, what are the consequences? What are the questions? What are the implied meanings? So, here's another one. Stand ye in holy places. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Matthew 24:15. Stand ye in holy places. So the implied meaning is there's probably unholy places. And then the questions are, you know, both. What are the holy, and then what are the unholy places? So then that kind of consequence would mean, well, then we should make sure we avoid those unholy places in order to make ourselves more available to be in the holy places. So it's really a thought thread that goes through when we stop what we're reading and ponder it. In Matthew 24:24, it's there shall arise false prophets and false Christs. So the implied meaning that is that there are true prophets and a true Christ. And, you know, we know there's only one Christ, so we know he came, but we do know he's going to come again. So we have to watch out for the idea that there's going to be some who come saying they're Christ, and then know what that looks like. What is it going to look like when Christ comes back again? And if there's false Christ, how do we make sure we don't fall into that trap of following false Christ? And if there's false prophets, then what does a true prophet look like? You know, what do they do? What have the true prophets in the past done? What are their patterns? How does the Lord use them and work with them? And so if there's going to be false prophets we have to watch for in the last days in our time, could there mean there's true prophets? And I happen to believe, yes, there are true prophets. But if you're pondering those, you know, and you're thinking and you look at the implied meaning of a scripture, it starts to broaden, it starts to give you a different perspective. Just a couple more for practice. Let's see. Romans 8:16, 17, and 21. The Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. So we are the children of God implies that we're brothers and sisters. So that means that kind of anybody born, when logic dictate, anybody born is a brother or sister. And so then we start to say, so then it goes on, and if children, so if brothers and sisters, then heirs. So if we're children, that means there's a parent. So the implied meaning is children have parents. Who is our parent? Who are our parents? So then, and if we're heirs, that means we are really, I mean, we are worthy of blessings. We're worthy of something. If we're an heir, that means we get something. So what are the somethings that we get? Heirs, okay, so then it goes, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God. So then it defines right there it defines who's the parent, who are we heirs to, and it's God. And joint heirs. So it's not just individuals, but brothers and sisters, because we're children together, brothers and sisters. So, and let's see, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. Joint heirs with Christ, meaning that Christ has to be our brother. He has to be our brother some way. And in our doctrine, it's a spiritual, where he's our spiritual brother. That's the implied meaning. Hey, Jen. So it starts to, when we start to go through scripture and ponder and use the technique of implied meaning. So taking the scripture and seeing what naturally it infers, what it kind of goes along, what logically. So don't get crazy and start just making things up. It's more of a natural thread that you follow along, just like I did with that. So another one would be, here's one from Isaiah 4:29. And in this scripture, they're talking about all the things you should and shouldn't do. And it says, and finally, I cannot tell you all the things whereby ye may commit sin. For there are diverse ways. So that means diverse means many. For there are many ways and means, even so many that I cannot number them. So he's saying basically there's so many ways you can sin. I can't even tell you how many ways you can sin. And so the implied meaning to me was, okay, if there's so many ways to sin, then there must be so many ways to do good things. That there's not just one way. There's just not one prescribed path. If there's so many ways that you can't even number the ways to sin, then you can't even number the ways to do good. So sometimes we have it in our heads that doing good is just one narrow way. And in this time in our history, I think with the racial inequality that's been going on for decades, centuries, I think that people are starting to say, this is the one way that you can make a difference. And I think, Joseph and Alan are playing, and I think, no, there's not just one way. We all have different talents, abilities, interactions, all these kinds of things. There are so many ways to do good and improve the situation. And when we get stuck in this narrow way to do good, then it impedes us. And we think, oh, that's not the right way to do things. So that's another, that's another implied meaning that brings out consequences that gives you a different perspective. The last one is Genesis 1:26, and God said, let us make man in our own image, after our likeness. So just the meaning, the overt meaning there is that there's more than one person there in the creating process of people, of man. So then it goes on, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And so to me it was, if God's there creating in a likeness, that one of the meanings, the implied meanings would be, there has to be females. There has to be female gods there doing something, because we don't look like males. Females don't look like males. So the implied meaning is there's got to be somebody up there that looks like a female. That's the implied meaning to me. And in our church, we have for decades known of a heavenly mother. It's in one of our hymns. It's been spoken of before. And I think, I hear a lot about outside of my church talking about female deities. Well, we've always believed that there are female deities, but we've just never really talked about it. It's just never been in the forefront. So this is one of the things and one of the ways that I use my creativity to take scripture, ponder it, look at the implied meaning, the natural, logical sequence that you can deduce out of it that doesn't stretch it to the stretching point of snapping, but that actually stretches it to the point of giving greater meaning. It broadens the perspective. It opens it up to more ideas. It just is a great way to actually read and look at anything. And I think that there's a lot of truths before our eyes. I think there's that we just don't see, that we just aren't looking at until something happens that makes us shift in our thinking, shift in whatever ways we're stuck, that kind of shifts us out of that and starts us thinking in a different way. The Lord isn't going to force us to do things. He waits and waits and waits and waits before he does anything drastic to make us get back on course. He lets us run our course because agency is so huge. The ability to choose. I think a lot of times that we look at how we're doing things. Okay, so for instance, I think almost anybody you ask want poor people to be taken care of. I think the big problem is that we all have different ways we want to do it, and that we think that there's only one right way to do it. So anyways, the Lord's not going to force us to do it. He only goes as fast. He lets us go along, trial and error, because that's what happens when you have agency. You have error. That's a talk for another day. That's talking about agency. We'll talk about another day. But he'll only go as fast as we want to go. But there are so many truths in the scriptures that are just begging for us to open our minds up to and to look at with a more deliberate study. So that's my tip today. Use your creativity, pull out the implied meaning, see what the natural questions are and consequences are, and just build your own thinking muscles, your creative thinking muscles. And I think you'll find some great enlightenment from it. It has helped me. So that's the tip for today. Remember, you have a creative heartbeat, so listen for it. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye.